guys, I'm Drago, and today I decided to dabble in some pixel art. Now, the game Pokemon Infinite Fusion hosted a contest for a new loading screen, and of course I just had to join. I absolutely love Pokemon Infinite Fusion, it's a really fun game and I love spriting for it. So as soon as I saw this contest, I just had to join in, and I thought why not record it and make it a speed paint for you guys to enjoy as well. So without further ado, let's get into it. Before we get going, you may notice something new about my channel. Yep, there's a brand new shiny join button. After a long battle with YouTube where my channel was bugged and it just wouldn't let me enable it even though I was eligible, finally my channel memberships work. So if you'd like to support me further, then consider joining the channel. You can get fun perks such as custom emojis, members only live streams, sneak peeks at works in progress, an exclusive Discord supporter role, and even a chance to collaborate with me in artwork. And you will get shouted out at the end of each video. So if you're interested, please do consider pressing that join button, and anyone who does, I am eternally grateful to you. Thank you so much. So the contest had a few parameters that you had to go by, mainly the size of the canvas, as well as needed to include a certain line of text, which is that all sprites are made by the Pokemon Infinite Fusion community. I can't remember it off the top of my head. You'll see it in the video. But the first thing that I decided to do was just on a large canvas do a really rough sketch. Now before even starting, I'd done a few thumbnail sketches, just blotting out some ideas, thinking about what I could do, and I added on the idea of playing with Mewtwo's origin, because obviously Mewtwo is like an artificially made Pokemon, and that kind of fits into the idea of Fusion being artificially made Pokemon because they're things that you fuse yourself. So that sort of fits into the idea of the game. As for what Pokemon is going to be fusing with, I went with Sceptile purely because Sceptile is my absolute favourite Pokemon. So the general idea was to have test tube on one side, test tube on the other side, and then have the big test tube in the middle, which would show the fusion. The reason why I did a sketch first is because it's easier to lay out everything and get the composition going if I do a more detailed sketch on a larger canvas first. And it would also really help me with the anatomy of the Pokemon, because trying to get details on anatomy right in pixel is really difficult for me. Having that lack of resolution just doesn't help me very well. But if I sketch it first and then downsize that sketch, I can see how the pixels will sort of line up to make the anatomy. It sort of makes all the shapes for me, and then I can go in and I can refine that and I can clean it up. For the fusion in the middle, it needs to be a nice mix of Sceptile and Mewtwo. So I gave it sort of Sceptile's more pointed head, and I gave it Sceptile's claws and leaf blades, and Mewtwo's tail I adorned with the leaves of Sceptile's tail as well. And sort of according to the fusion guidelines of Pokemon Infinite Fusion, it would also have Sceptile's colour palette, because this fusion would be Sceptile's head on Mewtwo's body. Because the way Infinite Fusion works, each fusion has basically two versions of it. So Sceptile and Mewtwo, you can either fuse Sceptile onto Mewtwo, which puts Sceptile's head on Mewtwo's body, which then makes it Sceptile's colour, or you can fuse Mewtwo and Sceptile with it being that way around, where Mewtwo's head goes on Sceptile's body and it'll be Mewtwo's colours. Hopefully that makes sense. It's a little bit confusing, but it sort of makes sense. Now once my sketch was done, I put it on a downsized canvas to the actual size that it needed to be. And as you can see, that makes the sketch look a lot grainier, but what that does is it means I can see where I can place each pixel. And this is why I did a sketch beforehand, because it'll just make everything so much easier for the anatomy and such. But first things first was actually doing a text box. So I got a reference image of an in-game text box from sort of Gen 3 style. I can't actually remember if it was Gen 3 or Gen 5, it was either of the two. And this text box would serve for where the mandatory text would be going. And for the text itself, I typed out using Paint Tool size inbuilt text tool, and then that was downsized, and then I was able to go over that with actual pixels and clean it up, making it a legible pixel font. I also added a drop shadow behind each letter just so it pops out a little bit more. even though this is pixel art and not full resolution art, I still went with sort of a similar method that I usually do, and that's just starting with line work. Now thankfully spriting with Pokemon Infinite Fusion has helped me learn how pixel art works. It's helped me learn how to do curves smoothly, how to avoid jagged lines, and just make everything look nice and uniform and neat. So for the test tubes, a lot of it was keeping up this sort of uniform shape. I utilised size straight line tool a lot by pressing shift. That really helped with these test tubes. In general, the environment itself is a very sterile lab environment, and because it's all man-made machinery, everything's going to have very, very straight uniform lines. So that the test tubes didn't look too plain, I added some decoration on them. I decided to add some lights that lead to a segment where there is a fusion splicer in the middle. The fusion splicer is the item in game that allows you to fuse Pokemon. Dude, I'm trying to record this voiceover and I literally just got a spam call in the middle of it. I've been getting so many spam calls lately, can they leave me alone? Oh my god. Anyway, so each test tube has a splicer, which then leads into the main test tube where the fusion appears. And on the main test tube, I decided to put loading because it has a bit of a double meaning. So of course, it's a loading screen, so it shows that the game is loading, but it can also mean that the fusion is loading. So within this universe where they're creating this fusion in the lab, the fusion is loading, it's being created, but at the same time, it also shows that the game is loading. And to make it even more sort of experimenty, I added these nodes and wires coming off of each Pokemon. This was very inspired by that one Mewtwo Pokemon card. I think people call it Mewtube, which is quite funny. But it's a really cool one. You saw me using it as a reference earlier when I was sketching, where Mewtwo is in the tube. So this is very inspired by that. In contrast to the environment, the Pokemon themselves were a lot more organic. They have a lot more curves to them. They're not all just straight lines, they're not all uniform. So this really, really tested me here with this lining. Obviously you need things to not look jagged and horrible, but at the same time not look really, really stiff and solid. In the end, I think I got somewhere. I wasn't really liking it at first, but I think that's purely because it just wasn't coloured yet. I was hoping that colouring would make it look better. It was very much a trust the process sort of thing. Now, I found the background quite difficult to do. I've said it before in videos, but I'm really bad at backgrounds. It's one of my weaker points in art. But thankfully doing it in pixels actually sort of helped me a little bit. And I'm glad I decided that everything was going to be tiled because it let me do this grid pattern on both the floor and the wall, which really, really helped with the perspective. So while I was very, very much out of my comfort zone here, I definitely found it easier than a lot of other backgrounds I usually do. It was still difficult though, and especially trying to place the props and make it look like they're actually part of the environment and not just floating. Colouring was very simple. I did it exactly how I normally do it. Just fill in an area with the base colour, erase around the lines, and then use clipping mask to add in each separate colour. In general, I wanted to go for this vibe of one side being purple or pink and one side being green to show both Mewtwo and Sceptile, and have that lighting kind of merged together. I also decided to put a sort of blue overlay on top of the Pokemon in the tubes to get the idea of glass. Now with everything coloured in, it was time to move on to the most complicated part of this process, and that is lighting. Lighting in pixel art is not something I've obviously done very much. Luckily here, I'm able to use a lot of blending mode layers to sort of mess around, and I was still able to use my blur brush, which just automatically made it pixely anyway because of the resolution of the canvas. But this was at the point where I was experimenting a lot. It was just a case of putting down shades, seeing what looked good, because I was making sure to do everything on a separate layer, so that if I added something and I thought that doesn't look very good, I could just get rid of it without affecting the rest of the drawing. And that's something I can recommend. That if you're experimenting and you're doing something that might look good, might not look good, and you need to try it to see, then just do it on a completely separate layer from everything else, so that, hey, if it looks good, then you could keep it, but if it doesn't look good, you could just delete the layer and you're fine. That's something I recommend doing. Now in terms of shading the Pokemon themselves, I use a lot of my knowledge from actually splicing the fusions for the game, mixing that with my knowledge of general shading and lighting that I do for normal art. Shading these guys is actually quite fun in that respect, and adding the shading to the Pokemon themselves and the environment wasn't the issue. The issue was just the overall lighting and me trying to figure that out. Mewtwo was the first one I shaded, and as soon as I got everything in and I even coloured the line work a bit so it's not just black, so that it doesn't look just like a cartoon, it started to look really good and I really liked how it was turning out. Mewtwo was my experimental one, ironically enough. I'm sorry Mewtwo, you've been through enough. But I used Mewtwo to just sort of experiment with the shade and experiment with how I was going to light each test tube. And once I was happy with that, I moved on to Sceptile to do the same sort of thing. And with that done, I was able to move on to the focal point being the Sceptile and Mewtwo fusion in the middle. And with this being prime front and centre, I really needed to make sure this one looked good. I used lots of different layers of shade in here, lots of different tones. Really made sure to build up each shadow and highlight, while at the same time not making it too harsh. Using overlay here really helped, so I didn't have to manually pick the tones for each set of colours, and it really helped me get these nice gradients. I even added some dithering in areas just to add a bit more texture. And the final touch on the fusion was making glowing eyes, just to really make it stand out. Now finally, I just wanted to touch up the background a bit. I made the lights on each test tube actually look like lights by having sort of lighter areas in them, which sounds dumb, but you know what I mean. I edited some line work colours here and there, and just all in all just tried to refine the background a bit, add some finishing touches, and just try and make everything come together. Now, I'm sure you're all wondering, did I win? Well, yes and no. Now, the contest initially was to be only one loading screen wins, and that becomes the main loading screen for the game. However, in the end, the devs actually liked a lot of the entries, so they decided to instead have just one loading screen to make it so that every time you load the game, a different loading screen will pop up. And so while I didn't win the contest itself, I was one of the loading screens chosen to be within this cycle. So yes, my loading screen is in the game. However, when I tried to get it to pop up by rerunning the game over and over, I just couldn't get it to appear. So, I don't know, if you have Pokemon Infinite Fusion, let me know if you get it to appear if you see my loading screen. But all in all, I'm happy with how it turned out. And let me know down below what you think of it. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, maybe leave a like and subscribe. I'd really, really appreciate it. And I hope to see all of you wonderful people in the next video. Bye!